Have you ever wondered how an entire civilization can quietly disappear from the world's attention, even though its story shaped the destiny of a nation? There are places that dominate history books. There are places that fill postcards and travel magazines. And then there are places like Trenggalek, a land that rarely makes international headlines, a place many people have never heard of. Yet beneath its mountains, forests, and rugged southern coastline lies a story that stretches back more than 8 centuries, a story of kings who fought to protect their kingdoms, ancient inscriptions carved into stone that survived the collapse of empires, sacred lands granted extraordinary privileges by royal decree, villages that became witnesses to the rise of Hindu-Buddhist civilization, the spread of Islam, colonial conquest, and finally the birth of modern Indonesia. This is not simply the story of another Indonesian regency. This is the story of endurance, the story of a people who never stopped preserving their identity, even as kingdoms rose and fell around them. Because history is not always written by those who stood at the center of power. Sometimes history survives in places that quietly carried civilization forward while the world was looking somewhere else. Hidden along the southern coast of East Java, embraced by fertile valleys, towering limestone hills, and the endless waves of the Indian Ocean, stands one of Indonesia's most remarkable yet overlooked regions, Trenggalek. Today, it is officially known as Trenggalek Regency, one of the 38 regencies and cities that form East Java province. Its administrative capital is Trenggalek district, located approximately 180 kilometers southwest of Surabaya, the provincial capital and one of Indonesia's largest metropolitan centers. Covering an area of more than 1,261 square kilometers, Trenggalek is home to more than 753,000 people, according to Indonesia's official statistics in 2024. At first glance, these numbers may seem ordinary, but geography has always been one of Trenggalek's greatest strengths. Its location places it at the crossroads of mountains, fertile agricultural lands, and one of the most dramatic coastlines on the island of Java. To the north lies Ponorogo, a region famous for the legendary Riog performance that has become one of Indonesia's greatest cultural treasures. To the east is Tulungagung, historically known for its marble industry and ancient heritage. To the west stretch the lands of Pacitan and Ponorogo once again, creating natural connections that have existed for centuries through trade, migration, and cultural exchange. And to the south, nothing but the vast Indian Ocean, an ocean whose powerful waves have shaped not only the landscape, but also the character of the people who have lived here for generations. For thousands of years, the southern coast of Java has inspired both admiration and respect. Its beaches are breathtakingly beautiful. Its cliffs stand like ancient guardians overlooking the sea. Its waters are rich with marine life. Yet they can also become incredibly fierce, reminding everyone that nature always commands respect. Living beside this coastline required resilience. Communities learned to balance farming with fishing. They adapted to unpredictable seasons. They cultivated fertile valleys while maintaining deep respect for the mountains and the sea that surrounded them. This intimate relationship between people and nature would eventually become one of the defining characteristics of Trenggalek itself. Long before modern roads connected East Java, long before Indonesia existed as a nation, long before European ships arrived in Southeast Asia, these valleys already echoed with the footsteps of farmers, traders, priests, warriors, and travelers. Civilizations flourished here because geography offered something priceless: protection, abundant water, fertile land, natural trade routes connecting inland communities with the coast. Unlike many regions whose histories were shaped solely by warfare, Trenggalek developed through a delicate balance between agriculture, commerce, spirituality, and local governance. Every river became a source of life. Every mountain served as a natural fortress. Every coastal settlement became a gateway connecting Java with the wider maritime world. Even today, much of Trenggalek remains covered by rolling hills and dense forests. The landscape changes dramatically from fertile rice fields to rugged limestone formations before descending towards secluded beaches where the roar of the Indian Ocean dominates the horizon. For visitors, it is stunning. For historians, it is revealing. Because landscapes preserve memory. Mountains determine where kingdoms build their capitals. Rivers decide where civilizations grow. Forests protect communities during conflict. Coastlines connect isolated societies to distant worlds. Everything about Trenggalek's geography explains why this region became strategically valuable for centuries. Yet surprisingly, its greatest treasures are not its beaches or mountains. They are the stories hidden beneath them. Stories carved into ancient stone. Stories preserved in royal decrees. Stories passed from one generation to another long before anyone thought about writing them down. To understand Trenggalek, we must travel back more than 800 years, back to an era when East Java was ruled by powerful Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms, an age when royal authority extended across fertile plains, volcanic mountains, and coastal settlements, an age when loyalty could determine the survival of a kingdom, and betrayal could change history forever. The earliest documented foundations of Trenggalek's history are not legends, they are written in stone, literally. Centuries before Indonesia became a modern republic, royal inscriptions were already recording events that would define this region for generations. Among the most important of these is the Kamulan Inscription, a remarkable historical record created in the year 1194. It is this inscription that forms the historical basis for Trenggalek's official anniversary, making it one of the oldest continuously recognized administrative regions in Indonesia. But the Kamulan inscription tells far more than a simple date. It reveals a kingdom in crisis, a king forced into exile, a political struggle that threatened the stability of East Java itself, and, unexpectedly, it places the lands that would become modern Trenggalek at the very heart of that dramatic chapter in Indonesian history. The story begins with one of the final rulers of the Kingdom of Kediri, King Kertajaya, a monarch whose reign unfolded during one of the most turbulent periods in Javanese history. What happened next would reshape the political landscape of Java forever. King Kertajaya ruled during a time when the Kingdom of Kediri stood among the most influential powers in the Indonesian archipelago. Its fertile lands produced abundant harvests, its rivers connected prosperous settlements, its courts attracted scholars, priests and artists, its influence reached far beyond its capital. For generations, Kediri had been a symbol of stability and royal authority, but no kingdom remains powerful forever. Behind the grandeur of its palaces, tensions were growing. Political rivalries intensified. Regional elites competed for influence. Loyalty became increasingly fragile. Then came the crisis. The Kamulan inscription records that King Kertajaya was forced to flee the royal palace at Daha after an enemy launched an attack from the east. This was not a minor border conflict. It was an assault serious enough to drive a reigning monarch away from the center of his own kingdom. Imagine the uncertainty. A kingdom that had appeared unshakable suddenly found itself vulnerable. Royal officials scattered. Military commanders struggled to defend their territories. Villages wondered whether the authority they had trusted for generations would survive. For ordinary people, history is rarely experienced through grand speeches or glorious victories. It arrives as fear, as uncertainty, as rumors spreading from village to village, as families wondering whether tomorrow will still resemble today. The Kamulan inscription was created only a few months after this dramatic event. Rather than allowing these events to disappear into memory, the inscription preserved them with remarkable precision. That decision transformed a political crisis into a permanent historical record. More than 8 centuries later, historians can still reconstruct parts of this forgotten chapter because someone believed these events deserved to be remembered. That is the extraordinary power of inscriptions. Stone does not forget, paper burns, wood decays, empires collapse. But words carved into rock can survive earthquakes, tropical rains, volcanic eruptions, wars, and the passing of centuries. The Kamulan inscription became more than a document. It became a bridge connecting the modern world to medieval Java. Yet its importance reaches even further. The inscription also reflects something fundamental about the political culture of ancient Java. Power was never measured solely by military strength. Legitimacy mattered. Kings needed recognition. Communities needed assurance that order would return. Royal decrees were not merely administrative announcements. They represented promises that justice would be restored, promises that loyal communities would be rewarded, promises that civilization would continue despite political turmoil. It was within this environment that the lands of modern Trenggalek emerged as places of remarkable importance. Far from being an isolated frontier, this region became deeply connected to the kingdom's political and economic survival. Its villages supplied agricultural products, its forests provided valuable natural resources, its people demonstrated loyalty during difficult times. That loyalty would not go unnoticed. Long before the Kamulan inscription, several rulers had already recognized the strategic value of this region. Successive kings issued royal charters granting special privileges to communities across what is now Trenggalek. These grants transformed entire areas into what was known as Sima. To understand why this mattered, imagine receiving direct recognition from the highest authority in the kingdom. A Sima was not simply another village, it was land granted special status through royal decree. Communities designated as Sima often received exemptions from certain taxes or obligations because they had rendered exceptional service to the kingdom. Sometimes they protected sacred sites. Sometimes they supported military campaigns. Sometimes they maintained important infrastructure or assisted the royal court. In return, the king acknowledged their contribution in a formal and permanent way. This relationship created a bond between ruler and community, built not merely on power, but on mutual responsibility. For the people living there, such recognition carried immense prestige. It declared that their homeland possessed significance beyond its size. It meant that their labor, loyalty, and sacrifices had become part of the kingdom's official history. Remarkably, Trenggalek appears repeatedly in these historical records. The Kampak inscription from the era of Mpu Sindok mentions several places that remain familiar today: Dongko, Munjungan, Panggul, Watulimo, Priji. These were not imaginary places or legendary kingdoms. They were real communities, already active more than 1,000 years ago. Even more fascinating is the fact that governance during that period appears to have been centered around Gandusari. This suggests that organized administration already existed here long before modern districts or regencies were established. Think about what that means. When much of the world was still emerging from the early Middle Ages, communities in what is now Trenggalek were already participating in structured systems of governance recognized by powerful Javanese kingdoms. Agriculture flourished, trade networks operated, administrative authority functioned with surprising sophistication. The Campak inscription also reveals another intriguing detail. This region was known as a producer of gaplek, dried cassava that could be stored for long periods and served as an important source of food. Today, cassava may seem ordinary, but throughout history, reliable food supplies determined whether societies prospered or suffered. Communities capable of producing preserved food became invaluable during times of drought, war, or famine. A kingdom could only remain strong if its people could eat. Food security was national security. The people of this region were contributing not only to local prosperity, but also to the resilience of an entire kingdom. Their harvests sustained populations. Their agricultural knowledge became part of a larger economic system. Centuries later, another royal inscription strengthened this relationship even further. The Baru inscription records that the village of Baruharjo in present-day Durinan received Sema status because its people willingly provided lodging and assistance to the king during a military campaign against the region known as Hassin. This detail may appear small, yet it reveals an extraordinary picture of everyday life. Imagine royal armies moving across Java, thousands of soldiers, officials, messengers, religious advisors, supplies stretching across difficult terrain. Without the cooperation of local communities, such expeditions would have been impossible. The people who welcomed these travelers into their villages became silent partners in shaping history. Their hospitality, their logistical support, their unwavering loyalty, all of these became worthy of royal recognition. History often celebrates kings and generals, but kingdoms survive because ordinary people choose to stand with them. The farmers who grow food, the craftsmen who build tools, the villagers who open their homes, the communities that refuse to abandon hope during uncertain times. Trenggalek's history reminds us that civilizations are never built by rulers alone. They are built by countless individuals whose names may never appear in history books, yet whose actions make history possible. And this remarkable relationship between kings and communities would continue to shape Trenggalek for centuries, leaving behind a legacy that still echoes across its valleys, mountains, and ancient villages today. As centuries passed, the lands of Trenggalek became woven ever more deeply into the political and spiritual fabric of Java. This was no longer a collection of isolated villages scattered between mountains and the sea. It had become a landscape of trust, a region where royal authority, local leadership, and community life worked together in ways that allowed civilization to flourish. One inscription after another tells the same remarkable story. Different kings, different dynasties, different generations, yet they all returned to the same conclusion. The people living in these lands mattered. Among the most significant of these royal acknowledgements was the Kamulan inscription itself. King Srenga of Kadiri granted Sema status to the village of Kamulan, extending royal protection across the southern slopes of Mount Willis. This was more than an administrative decision. It was a declaration that the kingdom recognized the importance of preserving a community whose loyalty had proven invaluable. When historians compare the Campak inscription, the Baru inscription, the Kamulan inscription, and later royal charters, an extraordinary pattern begins to emerge. If all the territories mentioned in these records are plotted on a modern map, they cover almost the entirety of present-day Trenggalek Regency. That realization changes everything. Rather than being a forgotten frontier, nearly all of this region once enjoyed the special status of protected land. For medieval Java, that was exceptional. Few regions could claim such consistent recognition across multiple reigns and multiple centuries. It tells us something profound about the role Trenggalek played in the broader history of East Java. Its value was not accidental. Its importance endured. Then history took another dramatic turn. Toward the end of the Majapahit era, one of the most devastating civil wars in Javanese history erupted. Known as the Paragreg War, this conflict pitted rival factions of the Majapahit royal family against one another. The struggle weakened what had once been the greatest empire in maritime Southeast Asia. Resources were exhausted, political unity fractured, regional authority became increasingly unstable. Even powerful empires can be undone from within. History repeatedly teaches the same lesson. The greatest threat to a civilization is not always an external enemy. Sometimes it is division among its own people. As Majapahit struggled to hold itself together, regions across Java adapted to the changing political landscape. Communities that had long served the kingdom found themselves navigating uncertainty once again. Following the turmoil of the Paragreg War, the area that is now Bendungan district and its surrounding highlands received renewed recognition as Perdikan, or privileged territory. Once again, Trenggalek demonstrated an extraordinary ability to endure political transformation. Kingdoms changed, borders shifted, dynasties disappeared. Yet the communities here continued to preserve their identity. The mountains became silent witnesses to these transitions. Generation after generation climbed the same hills, cultivated the same terraces, prayed beneath the same skies. While rulers came and went, life continued. That continuity remains one of Trenggalek's greatest historical strengths. Its story is not defined by one empire. It is defined by survival across many empires. Even today, traces of that endurance can still be found in Bendungan. Nestled among cool mountain landscapes stands one of the region's most fascinating reminders of a different era. A coffee processing factory established around 1929 during the Dutch colonial period. Today, it is better known as Dilem Willis. Its colonial architecture still stands amid lush hillsides, offering visitors a glimpse into another chapter of Trenggalek's long journey. The factory tells a different kind of story, not one of kings or inscriptions, but one of economic transformation. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Dutch East Indies invested heavily in plantation agriculture across Java. Coffee became one of the colony's most valuable export commodities. The fertile volcanic soils surrounding Mount Willis proved ideal for cultivation. What had once supported ancient kingdoms now sustained an entirely different economic system connected to global trade. Beans harvested on these mountain slopes would eventually travel across oceans, loaded onto ships, sold in distant markets, consumed by people who would never know the names of the villages where they had been grown. It is a reminder that Trenggalek has always been connected to larger worlds. Whether through medieval kingdoms or colonial commerce, this region has never been as isolated as maps might suggest. Its people continuously adapted to changing times, without abandoning the landscapes that shaped them. And perhaps that is the defining characteristic of Trenggalek: adaptability without losing identity, progress without forgetting the past. The mountains taught patience, the forests taught resilience, the ocean taught humility. Together, they forged communities capable of surviving centuries of change. Yet another transformation was already approaching, not through conquest by foreign armies, not through the rise of another Hindu-Buddhist kingdom, but through the arrival of a new faith that would gradually reshape the spiritual landscape of Java forever. Islam did not arrive overnight. It spread through merchants, scholars, travelers, and respected local leaders. Rather than replacing everything that came before, it blended with many existing traditions, creating the rich cultural tapestry that still defines Java today. For Trenggalek, this new chapter would be closely linked with one of the most influential figures in East Javanese history, Batara Katong, the ruler who would establish Islamic authority in neighboring Ponorogo, and through him, the destiny of Trenggalek would once again become intertwined with the destiny of an entire region. A trusted servant named Menak Sopal would receive an important mission, a mission that would carry him into the lands of Bagong, a mission that would connect royal bloodlines, local leadership, and the continuing evolution of Trenggalek itself. Once again, history was about to change, not with the clash of armies, but with the quiet spread of ideas, faith, and enduring human relationships that would shape generations yet to come. By the late 15th century, Java was entering one of the most significant turning points in its long history. The great Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms that had dominated the island for centuries were gradually losing their influence. Majapahit, once the most powerful empire in the archipelago, was approaching its final chapter. At the same time, new Islamic kingdoms were emerging across the northern coast of Java. Trade routes carried more than spices, textiles, and precious goods. They also carried ideas, beliefs, languages, cultures, and slowly, almost quietly, a new spiritual landscape began to take shape. Unlike many parts of the world where religious change came through violent conquest, much of Islam's expansion across Java unfolded through diplomacy, commerce, education, and personal relationships. Merchants introduced new customs. Scholars taught new ways of understanding faith. Local leaders embraced these teachings while preserving many elements of Javanese culture that had existed for generations. It was not the destruction of one civilization by another, it was the evolution of civilization itself. One of the central figures in this transformation was Batara Katong. Remembered as the first Islamic ruler of Ponorogo, Batara Katong governed between approximately 1489 and 1532. His influence extended well beyond the borders of his own territory. He became one of the key leaders responsible for establishing political stability while introducing Islamic governance to Eastern Java. Yet what makes his story especially meaningful to Trenggalek is not simply his position as a ruler. It is the network of trusted individuals who carried his vision into neighboring regions. Among them was a loyal servant named Menak Sopal. History remembers kings, legends celebrate warriors, but every great leader depends upon people whose names rarely appear in grand chronicles. Menak Sopal was one of those people. Trusted by Batara Katong, he was assigned an important responsibility. He was instructed to serve Joko Lengkoro in the region of Bagong. This was no ordinary appointment. Joko Lengkoro was believed to be a son of Brawijaya V, also known as Bray Kertabumi, one of the final rulers associated with the Majapahit kingdom. He was also regarded as the younger brother of Batara Katong. In this single relationship, two worlds met: the fading legacy of Majapahit and the emerging Islamic leadership of Java. Rather than standing as enemies, these figures illustrate the complexity of history. Political change is rarely as simple as one kingdom replacing another. Families remained connected, local alliances continued, communities adapted. The transition unfolded gradually, shaped by cooperation as much as by conflict. For the people living in the lands that would become Trenggalek, these developments were deeply significant. New religious traditions arrived. Mosques began to appear alongside older sacred sites. Islamic teachings blended with long-established Javanese customs. Agricultural rituals evolved rather than disappeared. Local ceremonies continued, carrying echoes of older beliefs while embracing new spiritual meanings. This cultural synthesis remains one of Java's greatest strengths. Even today, visitors often notice that Javanese culture possesses a remarkable ability to preserve continuity while welcoming change. It is a civilization that rarely abandons its roots. Instead, it allows new branches to grow from ancient foundations. Trenggalek became part of that remarkable process. Its communities embraced new beliefs without losing their deep connection to the land, to family traditions, and to the values that had sustained them for centuries. This ability to adapt while preserving identity would become one of the defining characteristics of the region. But perhaps no aspect of Trenggalek's identity has inspired more curiosity than its very name. Every place carries a name. Some names describe geography, others honor rulers. Some preserve forgotten languages, others hide stories that survive only through oral tradition. For generations, the people of Trenggalek have shared a beautiful explanation passed down from parents to children, from grandparents to grandchildren. According to local tradition, the name Trenggalek comes from the phrase Teranjing Gali. In Javanese, it means the brightness of the heart or an enlightened soul. It is a poetic interpretation, a name that speaks not about power or conquest, but about inner light. Imagine a community choosing to define itself not through wealth, military strength, or political influence, but through clarity of heart. Whether historically precise or not, this interpretation reveals something important about how the people see themselves. Identity is not built only upon historical facts. It is also built upon the stories communities choose to believe. Stories shape values, values shape generations, and generations shape history. Yet historians have uncovered another fascinating explanation. Ancient manuscripts preserved by the Surakarta Palace suggest that the name Trenggalek may have been connected to something far more practical: gaplek, dried cassava. At first, this might sound surprising. How could the name of an entire region be linked to a humble food? The answer lies in understanding how valuable food production was throughout history. Gaplek was far more than a simple ingredient. Made by slicing and drying cassava under the tropical sun, it could be stored for long periods without spoiling. During difficult seasons, poor harvests, or times of conflict, gaplek became an essential source of survival. Communities that produced it played a crucial role in ensuring food security. The limestone landscape surrounding the Pegunungan Sewu region proved especially suitable for cassava cultivation. Over generations, the area became widely associated with producing high-quality, dried cassava. Some scholars believe the phrase gradually evolved through local pronunciation into the name we know today. Even traditional Javanese riddles preserve this connection. One well-known saying invites people by declaring, "Pohung garing, ayo menyang Trenggalek," literally, dried cassava, let us go to Trenggalek. To outsiders, it sounds like a playful expression. To historians, it may preserve an economic identity that stretches back centuries. What is remarkable is that neither explanation diminishes the other. One speaks to the spirit, the other speaks to survival. One celebrates enlightenment, the other honors the labor of ordinary farmers whose harvests sustained entire communities. Together, they tell us something profound. A civilization is remembered not only through kings and monuments, it is remembered through language, through food, through stories shared around family tables, through expressions repeated so often that people forget where they began. Sometimes the smallest traditions preserve the greatest history, and in Trenggalek, every generation has become another guardian of that memory. The name itself has become a bridge, connecting ancient kingdoms with modern Indonesia, connecting poetry with agriculture, connecting legend with documented history. It is a reminder that the soul of a place cannot be understood by maps alone. To truly know Trenggalek, you must listen to the voices that have echoed through its valleys for hundreds of years. Because every hill, every village, and every name carries a story waiting to be remembered. As the centuries unfolded, the political map of Java continued to change. Kingdoms disappeared, new powers emerged. Royal capitals shifted from one region to another. Yet through every transformation, Trenggalek remained, not because it stood at the center of imperial ambition, but because its people understood something that every enduring civilization eventually learns. Power is temporary, character is permanent. Following the decline of Majapahit and the establishment of Islamic rule across much of Java, authority gradually became concentrated under the Mataram Sultanate. From its royal court in central Java, Mataram expanded its influence across vast portions of the island, bringing together territories that had once belonged to different kingdoms under a single political authority. For Trenggalek, this marked another new chapter. The region was no stranger to adapting to changing rulers. Generations had already lived through the transitions from Kadiri to Singasari, from Majapahit to the Islamic kingdoms, and now to Mataram. Each era demanded flexibility. Each era required local leaders capable of preserving stability while respecting new political realities. As the Mataram Sultanate entered its later years, internal tensions once again reshaped the island. Court rivalries intensified. Succession disputes weakened central authority. Foreign influence, particularly from the Dutch East India Company, grew steadily stronger. Eventually, one of the most significant political agreements in Javanese history altered the future of the island forever. The Treaty of Gianti, signed in 1755, divided the once powerful Mataram Sultanate into separate royal courts. Although the treaty is often remembered for redrawing the political landscape of Central Java, its effects reached far beyond the royal palaces. Regions across the island experienced administrative reorganization. Trenggalek was among them. Before this political division, Pakubuwana II appointed Kanjeng Raden Tumenggung Sumotaruno as the first regent of Trenggalek. This appointment represented more than the selection of a local administrator. It formally recognized Trenggalek as a distinct governing region with its own leadership and responsibilities. For the first time, the office of regent gave the region a clearer political identity within the broader structure of Javanese governance. Leadership became more localized, administrative systems became more organized, the connection between local communities and the royal court became more direct. Yet history rarely moves in straight lines. After the Treaty of Gianti, administrative boundaries continued to evolve. Until around 1830, Trenggalek was grouped together with Pacitan and Ponorogo as part of the Mangka Negara territories administered under the Surakarta Sunanate. These frontier regions played an important role in supporting the kingdom's broader administration. Although distant from the royal capital, they remained essential components of the state's political and economic network. But another force was already reshaping the future of Java: the Dutch. By the 19th century, Dutch colonial authority had expanded dramatically across the island. The Dutch East India Company had disappeared, but the colonial government of the Dutch East Indies now exercised increasingly direct control over local administration. Traditional kingdoms gradually lost much of their political independence. Colonial officials introduced new systems of taxation, new legal structures, new methods of governance. For many regions, this meant profound change. For Trenggalek, it became another test of resilience. In 1845, the Dutch colonial administration officially recognized Trenggalek as an autonomous administrative region. While autonomy under colonial rule did not mean complete independence, it nevertheless reaffirmed Trenggalek's distinct administrative identity. The region that had been acknowledged by ancient kings through stone inscriptions was now being recognized once again under an entirely different political system. 4 decades later, in 1885, another important decision followed. The Governor-General issued an official decree establishing clearer administrative boundaries between Trenggalek and neighboring Tulungagung. Borders that today may appear ordinary were once the subject of careful political negotiation. Every line drawn on a map represented decisions affecting taxation, governance, agriculture, trade, and the daily lives of thousands of people. Maps are often treated as static. History reminds us they are anything but. They evolve alongside the societies they represent. Yet even these boundaries did not remain fixed. By 1932, colonial administrators once again reorganized several regions, temporarily combining Trenggalek with neighboring territories. Only a year later, after the death of Regent Ponegoro in 1933, Trenggalek lost its status as an independent regency and was merged into Tulungagung. Imagine how such a decision would have felt. A community whose identity had been shaped across centuries suddenly found its administrative existence erased with the stroke of a pen. Its history remained, its people remained, its traditions remained, but officially, Trenggalek no longer existed as a separate regency. For many communities, such a loss might have marked the end of a distinct identity, but not here. Identity does not disappear simply because governments redraw boundaries. It lives within memory, within culture, within families who continue telling their children where they come from, within traditions that no administrative decree can erase. The people of Trenggalek never stopped being Trenggalek, and history eventually acknowledged that truth. Following Indonesia's struggle for independence and the birth of the Republic, the nation faced the enormous task of rebuilding its administrative structure. Countless regions required reorganization. Historical identities that had been altered under colonial rule were carefully reconsidered. In 1950, an important decision restored the historical boundaries of Trenggalek, along with those of Pacitan and Ponorogo. After centuries of political change, colonial restructuring, and administrative mergers, Trenggalek once again stood as its own regency. It was more than a bureaucratic adjustment. It was the restoration of a historical identity that had survived every era. From ancient inscriptions carved into stone, to royal charters, to Islamic kingdoms, to colonial decrees, to the birth of an independent Indonesia, the name Trenggalek endured. Very few places can trace such an unbroken thread of identity across more than 800 years. Empires vanished, governments changed, flags rose and fell, yet the people remained faithful to the land that had shaped them. That may be Trenggalek's greatest achievement, not that it became the richest region, not that it became the largest, but that through every challenge, it never forgot who it was. And perhaps that is the lesson hidden within its remarkable history. Civilizations are not measured only by the monuments they build, they are measured by the values they preserve when everything around them changes. Look at a map of Indonesia today, and Trenggalek may appear as just one small regency among hundreds spread across the archipelago, a single administrative region, a quiet corner of East Java, easy to overlook. But maps can be deceiving. They show borders, they do not show memory. They reveal distances, they cannot reveal sacrifice. They identify places, they cannot explain why those places still matter. To understand Trenggalek, you have to look beyond statistics and administrative boundaries. You have to see what generations before us saw: a homeland worth protecting, a community worth preserving, a legacy worth passing on. Walk through its villages today and you will find children laughing on roads that follow paths once travelled by royal messengers. Farmers tending rice fields where ancient communities cultivated the same fertile soil centuries ago. Fishermen setting out before sunrise from shores that have witnessed countless generations facing the unpredictable waters of the Indian Ocean. Life continues, modern, dynamic, yet deeply connected to the past. The mountains that once protected medieval settlements still dominate the horizon. The rivers that nourished early agriculture continue flowing toward the sea. The forests that sheltered communities during uncertain times still blanket much of the landscape. Nature has changed remarkably little. It is humanity that has transformed around it. This continuity gives Trenggalek something increasingly rare in the modern world: a living relationship between history and everyday life. In many places, history survives only inside museums, locked behind glass, read from information panels, separated from daily existence. In Trenggalek, history is woven into the landscape itself. It lives in village names first mentioned more than 1,000 years ago. It lives in oral traditions shared by grandparents long before children learn them in school. It lives in ceremonies where ancient customs continue alongside Islamic prayers. It lives in the enduring values of cooperation, humility, and resilience that have defined local communities for generations. This is why preserving history matters, not because the past is more important than the future, but because the future becomes stronger when people understand where they came from. Every inscription, every archaeological site, every traditional dance, every local legend, every historic building. They are not relics collecting dust. They are chapters of a story still being written. And today, Trenggalek continues writing new chapters. Roads connect communities that were once separated by rugged terrain. Schools educate a new generation whose opportunities extend far beyond what their ancestors could have imagined. Farmers combine traditional knowledge with modern agricultural techniques. Young entrepreneurs use digital technology to introduce local products to national and international markets. Tourism is beginning to reveal what local communities have known all along: that Trenggalek is blessed with extraordinary natural beauty, hidden beaches framed by towering cliffs, crystal clear waters stretching toward the horizon, rolling green hills that seem endless, dense forests rich with biodiversity, mountain landscapes where cool air carries the scent of coffee plantations and tropical vegetation. These are not simply destinations, they are landscapes shaped by centuries of human history. Each valley has witnessed generations building homes, cultivating fields, raising families, and preserving traditions. Each mountain has silently observed kingdoms rise and disappear. Each shoreline has welcomed fishermen, merchants, explorers, and dreamers. The land remembers. And perhaps that is why so many visitors leave Trenggalek with something more valuable than photographs. They leave with perspective. Because Trenggalek reminds us that greatness does not always announce itself loudly. Some places influence history quietly, patiently, without demanding recognition. For centuries, Trenggalek stood in the shadow of larger kingdoms: Kediri, Singasari, Majapahit, Mataram, the Dutch East Indies, the Republic of Indonesia. Each left its mark, yet none erased the identity that had already taken root here. Instead, every era added another layer to an already remarkable story. That is the essence of resilience, not resisting every change, but absorbing change without losing yourself. It is a lesson that extends far beyond one regency in East Java. It speaks to every community, every nation, every individual. Because all of us will face moments when circumstances change beyond our control. The question is never whether change will come. History guarantees that it will. The real question is what we choose to preserve when it does. Trenggalek answered that question centuries ago. It preserved its memory, its culture, its dignity, its connection to the land, its belief that identity is inherited not only through blood, but through shared values and collective remembrance. That is why the Kamulan Inscription still matters. That is why ancient villages continue to be remembered. That is why stories passed down through generations deserve to be told again. Because every forgotten history is a piece of humanity waiting to be rediscovered. Perhaps the greatest treasure of Trenggalek has never been hidden beneath its soil. It has always lived within its people, within their determination to endure, within their willingness to adapt, within their quiet confidence that no matter how many empires rise or fall, some things are simply too valuable to lose. And maybe that is the message this remarkable land has been whispering across more than 8 centuries. Civilizations are not remembered because they were perfect. They are remembered because they endured. Not because they escaped hardship, but because they refused to surrender their identity in the face of it. So the next time you hear the name Trenggalek, do not think of it as just another dot on the map of Indonesia. Think of a land where ancient kings left their words carved in stone, where ordinary villagers earned the respect of powerful rulers through loyalty and service, where mountains, forests, and the sea became silent guardians of an extraordinary heritage, where history never truly disappeared. It simply waited for the world to listen. Because long before the modern nation of Indonesia was born, long before highways crossed East Java, long before satellites mapped every corner of the earth, there was already a place called Trenggalek, a place that proved one timeless truth. The strongest foundations of a civilization are not built from stone. They are built from the people who choose, generation after generation, to remember who they are. And perhaps that is why Trenggalek deserves far more than a passing mention in history. It deserves to be understood. Because when we study places like this, we begin to realize that the history of Indonesia was never written by only a handful of famous capitals. It was written by hundreds of communities, thousands of villages, millions of ordinary people whose names may never appear in textbooks, yet whose lives sustained kingdoms, protected traditions, and carried civilization forward. Trenggalek is one of those places. Its contribution cannot always be measured by the size of its armies or the wealth of its palaces. Instead, it can be measured by something far more enduring: continuity. For more than 800 years, this land has remained inhabited, cultivated, governed, and remembered. Generation after generation inherited not only fields and homes, but also stories. Stories about loyalty, stories about perseverance, stories about communities that stood together when kingdoms faced uncertainty. That continuity is extraordinary. Few places anywhere in the world can point to written historical records spanning so many centuries while still preserving the names of villages that continue to exist today: Dongko, Panggul, Munjungan, Watulimo, Priji, Kamulan, Bendungan. These are not merely names on road signs, they are living witnesses to history. Imagine standing in one of those villages today. Children ride bicycles along quiet roads, farmers prepare their fields, the call to prayer echoes across the valleys, markets open with the first light of morning. Life feels familiar, peaceful, ordinary. Yet beneath every step lies a landscape that has witnessed the ambitions of kings, the spread of religions, the arrival of colonial powers, the struggle for independence, and the birth of a modern nation. That is what makes Trenggalek remarkable. Its greatest monuments are not always built from stone. Its greatest monument is time itself. Time has tested this region again and again. Political upheaval, economic transformation, colonial occupation, administrative reorganization, natural challenges, social change. Still, the heartbeat of the community never stopped. Perhaps that is because the people here understood something that every generation eventually discovers. History is not something we inherit automatically. It survives only when someone chooses to protect it, someone chooses to remember, someone chooses to tell the story again. Think about the Kamulan Inscription, a royal decree carved into stone in 1194. The people who created it could never have imagined the world we live in today. They could not have imagined airplanes crossing continents in hours, the internet connecting billions of people instantly, artificial intelligence helping people explore the past. Yet because they chose to preserve their story, we are still able to hear their voices across more than 8 centuries. That is the power of historical memory. It allows conversations to continue long after the speakers themselves are gone. It transforms the past from something distant into something deeply personal. Because history is never only about dates, it is about people. The mother who taught her children the traditions of their ancestors, the farmer who harvested food that sustained an entire community, the village elder who remembered the old stories, the artisan who carved stone, the messenger who carried royal commands across mountains, the fisherman who trusted the sea before dawn, the scholar who copied ancient manuscripts by hand, the leader who chose unity instead of division. Together, they built the Trenggalek we know today, not through one extraordinary act, but through countless ordinary acts repeated across generations. This is why local history matters. It reminds us that greatness does not begin in capitals alone. It begins wherever people choose to build a better future while honoring the sacrifices of those who came before them. Indonesia's strength has always come from its diversity. More than 17,000 islands, hundreds of ethnic groups, hundreds of languages, countless local traditions. Each region contributes a unique thread to the nation's identity. Remove even one thread and the entire fabric becomes weaker. Trenggalek is one of those essential threads. Its history enriches the story of East Java. Its culture enriches the story of Indonesia, and its resilience offers a lesson that reaches far beyond national borders. Because every society, regardless of where it exists, faces the same challenge. How do you embrace the future without forgetting the past? Trenggalek offers one possible answer. Remember your roots, honor your ancestors, protect your culture, welcome change with wisdom rather than fear, and never mistake quietness for insignificance. Some of history's greatest achievements were accomplished far from the spotlight. Perhaps the world is only beginning to rediscover what Trenggalek has always known, that true greatness does not need to announce itself, it simply endures, century after century, generation after generation, heart after heart. And as long as these stories continue to be told, the voices carved into ancient stone will never truly fall silent. they will continue speaking to anyone willing to listen, reminding us that somewhere along the southern coast of East Java, between the mountains and the endless Indian Ocean, there exists a remarkable land whose history is not merely preserved in books. It is alive. It breathes through its people. It echoes through its valleys. It stands within its ancient villages, and it continues to inspire everyone who discovers that even the quietest places can leave the deepest mark on history. This is Trenggalek, not simply a regency, not merely a point on a map, but a living testament that civilizations endure when their people refuse to let memory fade. And that may be the greatest legacy of all. Even now, the story of Trenggalek is still being written. History did not end with the last royal inscription. It did not end when colonial rule came to an end. It did not end when Indonesia declared independence.